I'm 30 now, and I remember back when I was in high school in my final year and the school was trying its hardest to make a good impression and possibly save her from closing down. You see, my high school wasn't the best, and years after years, lots of troubling pupils and poor grades were taking its effect on the school. Literally, after my year ended, the school closed down for good, and the other pupils had to change schools, and the teachers of my school had to look for another job. The head officials of my school tried one last thing to resurrect my final year. They tried making after-school clubs, and that's about it, but the after-school clubs were a little lame due to lack of funding to make it more exciting. They tried doing art clubs and reading clubs, but not many people attended those types of clubs. The popular after-school clubs was the swimming club. A certain teacher would be chosen every Friday to look after us and make sure we get to the swimming center safely. The center was also on its last knees, and I guess that's how my poor school managed to cheaply fund it. It wasn't the best swimming of places, as they didn't have much equipment for weak swimmers, or those who couldn't swim, and the water wasn't that warm, but manageable. Only 10 people from my year, including me, attended the swimming classes, in which every teacher had been chosen to look after us, who then straight away would give us over to the swimming coach for an hour and a half, and we wouldn't see that teacher until a little bit later after our swimming classes were over. And to be honest, they didn't really care to watch us swim on the Friday evening. In their heads, they had better plans on what they would rather do instead, like drinking, and also you could tell by now our teachers weren't very good. The 10 of us were the well-behaved out of the year. No bullying really happened, and the swimming coach was really depressed. And for the first couple of weeks of attending these swimming classes, nothing really happened. All that our swimming coach did was sit around and said nothing, while all 10 of us would just start messing around in the non-deep end of the pool. As we were all weak swimmers and didn't dare to go over to the deep end of the pool, it was alright in a way, because the 10 of us enjoyed each other's company, and we just lazed about in the pool as our supposed swimming teacher was extremely depressed and sitting far away from us thinking about something, and our teacher, who was chosen by the school to look after us, they were glad to get rid of us for an hour and a half. The 10 of us became good friends, and the swimming club became a sacred hangout in a sense, and it was a good moment of life. We would try to compete who could hold their breath the longest underwater, and would see that the swimming equipment they had, so we could play with it in the swimming pool on the non-deep end. We started making up stories of our quiet swimming coach, that he might be some sick serial killer, and we would make jokes about him. We even went further as to make jokes that he was a pedophile. In the 6th week of these swimming classes, our depressed swimming coach finally said something to us, which was, "Hey, how many here are strong swimmers?" he asked. None of us put our hands up. He then went on to say, "Fantastic. That means you are all fresh and ready to learn the best way to learn swimming." I threw the drowning game. He told us with a smile, and we all looked at each other as well as staring at him as he goes into a room which he unlocked. But he had the keys. I also want to add as well that the management at the swimming center was not very good, and the other employees were hardly even around. As our swimming coach came out of the room, he wore some strange outfit with weird sticks with animalistic heads on the top. It was ritualistic and voodoo-like. He told us all to get in the water, and he came into the water wearing those weird overalls. And one of us had to go even further and stand right next to the creepy swimming coach. We were all in the non-deep end, and Martin, who was to be the guinea pig for our swimming coach's example, told Martin he had to go underwater and hold his breath. Our swimming coach then started muttering some strange words that even today I cannot fathom what he was saying and waving the sticks about, and then held Martin down as he struggled to breathe. As Martin's body was floating, we could see something shiny shaped like Martin's floating away, and our coach told us to chase Martin's soul and bring it back to his body, and we all listened and dragged Martin's soul back into his body through the water, and he started wailing and screaming. Well done. That's the drowning game. And you all swam through the deep end and chased Martin's soul, he told us. We were all laughing at how cool it was. This was, and Martin started laughing as well. We all tried the drowning game one by one. Our head coach always doing these weird spells. When I gave it my go, and my spirit wandered off of my body, floating in the water, I felt like I was flying in another dimension. I could see everything. It felt good. The drowning game made us all better swimmers, and then our coach wanted to go at it, drowning as he missed the feeling of drowning and the souls floating away in the water. He wrote on a piece of paper of what he said. They chose me to do the ritual in the swimming coach, and I didn't have that piece of paper anymore. I can't remember what it said. And the words he said, but I was wearing his ritualistic clothes and holding those weird sticks. I followed every command on the piece of paper, and as our coach drowning in, my class started swimming after his soul. And then saw a demonic-like creature grabbing onto his soul. They all tried to grab his soul and hold on to him and pull him out and back into his body until they were all taken underwater. And as I stood there frightened and saw all of their souls wandering around the water in their bodies. Their bodies were not seen at this point. Then those same creatures took their souls, and I never did play the drowning game again. Ever. And never went back to that swimming pool. I guess there's some danger to a game that my coach failed to know. The center closed down, and so did our school. It was near Halloween time when me and my friends were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell us about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date. Around the time that they would have said goodbye, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area, so the two drove up to the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking into just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead would pass under some dark trees, which would be dark. And because it was getting to be quite late, he ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female said that she had the same feeling, and it was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees, when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see what it was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview on the serial killer Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and just killed her. And when he heard some people coming up the trail, he explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body and for some reason just turn around and walk away. I was about 3 years old at the time. My brother was 5. Our parents were going through a rough divorce, so my grandparents offered to look after my brother and I until the divorce was final, so that we weren't caught up in the mess. My grandparents' anniversary was coming up, so my grandmother thought it would help our mother take her mind off things to spend some time with us so she could relax. She and my grandfather went out for the evening and left me and my brother home with our mother for the night. Things seemed to be going good at first, nothing out of the ordinary. It was starting to get a little bit late, but me and my brother were just sitting on the living room floor watching TV. Our mother was on the couch behind us after a while. She asked if we had heard anything and remembered. We both looked at her, and she had this worried look on her face. She muted the television for a moment to listen, and we started hearing noises coming from our basement. It was the sound of the bathroom door in our basement swinging open and closing again. It sounded like someone had just walked in the bathroom and slammed the door. But that couldn't be possible, seeing as how me, my older brother, and our mom were the only ones in the house at the time. My mom dismissed it at first, reasoning that the house was just old, and old houses usually make strange noises, so we went back to watching TV for a while. About an hour or so passed, and it was about 8 o'clock, almost time for my brother and I to go to bed. Mom muted the television again and told us to be quiet. We listened for a minute and didn't hear anything at first. Then after a while, we began to hear sounds of pounding coming from the basement just under the living room floor. It was soft at first, but as it went on, it got louder and louder. The sound encircled the living room almost like a shark tank circling on its prey. It got closer, and my brother and I were sitting as it circled around us, growing louder and louder until it finally sounded like someone was banging on the living room floor under us with their fists, trying to break through the floorboards. I and my brother jumped up on the couch and huddled ourselves close around our mom, who was curled up in the couch and just as scared as we were. The sounds of the pounding slowly subsided. Mom frantically dialed the restaurant where my grandfather said he and our grandmother would be. After a while, my grandfather picked up and asked what was wrong. My mom told him that they were hearing what they were hearing. My grandfather was, and still is, as firm skeptic. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He told her it was probably just the pipes rattling, and she was just under a lot of stress from the divorce, and imagining was running away from her. Her imagination was running away from her. He then told her to be sure to leave us to get us to bed by 9 o'clock, and he would see us in the morning, and he would hug up. A few minutes later went by, and we were still huddled together on the couch. Mom did her best to stay calm and hold herself together for my brother and me, saying that Granddad would probably be right. It was an old house after all, so we just went back to watching television, trying to keep our minds off the situation before we had to go to bed. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but a strong feeling of fear came over my mom as she turned off the television. I could see it in her eyes as my brother and I both looked back at her. We sat there in a silence for only a moment. The air was dead quiet. Then the banging started up again, louder than ever. It sounded like someone was frantically trying to break through the floor in a fist of rage. Mom picked up the phone and dialed the restaurant again, but the phone wasn't working. She picked up both from the floor and pushed us into the main hall, and we ran into the kitchen to get our coats from the chair and at the end of the table next to the basement door. Suddenly, I and my brother both heard what was sounding like a set of heavy combat boots stomping up the basement stairs and hairs racing slam against the basement door. It sounded like whatever was down there wanted to get out. We then heard a tumbling noise as if someone had thrown a chair down the basement stairs. Mom didn't waste a second in getting us the hell out of that front door. She practically threw us outside, and we spent the rest of the evening in her car until our grandparents got home. Our grandmother's car finally pulled into the lot end at the top of our street, and my grandfather saw that we were sitting in my mom's car, and he got angry. He demanded to know why we weren't in bed before they'd return home. My mom told them everything. You could tell by the way she spoke that she was shaken. My brother and I confirmed everything she said, but our grandfather had not believed any of it. He went up to the locked room on the second floor and grabbed his pistol from the gun cabinet and demanded my mom follow him in the basement so that he could show her that there was absolutely no one else in the house, but she refused to follow him into the basement, of course. After checking everything over, nothing was found to be broken, so there couldn't have been anyone else in the house, so our grandmother did not see need convincing. She had always believed in ghosts. She had stories of her own encounters with the paranormal. By the way, Mom never spent another night in our grandpa's house alone after that. To this day, she refuses to stay after dark. My brother is 30 now, and I'm 28. Our grandmother has since passed away, and our grandfather's health hasn't been what it should be, so I stay with him, and I look after him. To this day, I don't know who or what was in the basement that night. I hope I never find out, but every time my grandfather asks me to go down to the basement to get something for him, I always get that feeling that there's something watching me down there. And every time I go down there, the bathroom door on the far side of the basement is always open. No matter how many times I close it, every time I go down there, the goddamn door is open. Always. A little update on this story. I've looked into the history of my grandfather's house where the events took place. As it turns out, several of the previous owners had died on the property. One person had a heart attack and died in his sleep, and one of the others on the second floor. A second person had died of a blood clot in her brain in our living room floor. And the third, being the original owner of the house, when it was first built in 1911, had fallen down the basement stairs and broke his neck against the wall of the foundation. Could this have been him in our basement? I've experienced a lot with the paranormal, but this is probably the scariest one. I was at my best friend's house for the first time. I was only 5, but I remember everything was very clear. I got to her house and I walked to the door. I knocked on the door and they opened and let me inside. I walked through the door and was greeted by a huge pit bull. I knew that its name was Brutus because my friend talked about it at school. My friend led me over to her kitchen. The next thing I remember was her sister, 2 at the time, having a tub of something. I thought that they were possibly dog treats in the small tub because the dog was standing in front of her. I forgot what was actually in the tub, but I know it wasn't treats. A few hours later, we went to her grandfather's party. I don't know why she invited me over the next day, but that's not important. Her grandfather had a dog too. It started to rain, so everyone decided to go over to my friend's house. We all ride to her house again, even the dog. All I remember after that, before morning, was the adults playing games in the dining room, and me and my friends were falling asleep to Star Wars. But then I woke up and everyone was gone. They clearly had all gone home, and in my 5-year-old mind, all I was wondering is, where's the dog? I asked her dad. Where's the dog? I asked. Brutus died. We don't have a dog. I mean the one we brought home from the party. Oh, they took him home. I didn't notice for a while, but when I did, my heart stopped. How could I have seen Brutus if he was dead? This is my only big paranormal story, but still to this day, I hate every dog but my own. We've always had colorful people live in the rental next door. There were Josie and Bob, for example. Josie was about 30, and Bob was in his 70s, and they weighed about 600 pounds between them. They were reasonable folks, but made a comical-looking pair. It's not even like Josie was looking for a sugar daddy. Since we lived in a lower-class middle area, and Bob was on disability as he lost his legs to diabetes, so I don't know what promulgated the May-December marriage. We later had a lesbian couple who moved in next door with the 2 sons. About 4 and 5. They weren't a problem either, except the boys would peep into the windows, which was annoying but negligible. After that, we had a young married couple with 2 American bulldogs. One of them would climb our tree and bark at the squirrels for literally hours. They were good neighbors, and we enjoyed barbecues with them frequently. Weird as some of the people were, none of these were anything compared to our first neighbor, Paul. I was maybe in the 2nd grade, and my sister was in 3rd when Paul moved in. He was puny, with greasy black hair and a scraggy goatee. Maybe in his mid-50s, he wore a stained wife beater and gray sweatpants no matter what reason. He was divorced and unemployed, and lived alone with his dogs, a mean shepherd mix. I remember hearing him yelp at night sometimes, so I'm guessing he beat her, which might have caused her aggression. But if the dog was mean, Paul was even worse. He let the dogs outside in all weather, oftentimes without water on hot days or shelter on cold ones. If my sister and I made what he considered too much noise playing outside, or if we tried to give the dog water, he would threaten to stick the dog on us. I even remember him knifing our basketball when it landed in his yard. He never shoveled his sidewalks in the snow, picked up his dog's poop, or mowed his lawn. He was also a loud and aggressive drinker. It sounded like he was pounding on the wall and ceilings at all hours of the night with fucking pots and pans when he was on a bender. However, the biggest issue with the parking spots, our township allowed 1 street parking permit per adult living in a household. Paul thought his rule didn't apply to him. Not only did he never have a parking permit, he got ticketed and towed all the time, too. He would double park his old blue van with fake wood paneling half in front of our house and half in front of his, efficiently taking up 2 spots. My parents both work 12-hour days and have a passive-aggressive, low bullshit tolerance, so eventually they gave up reasoning with him and parked elsewhere. One day my mom came home from work and noticed Paul's van wasn't there. My sister and I were in the car with her since she had picked us up from school. That was great, since she was actually able to park in front of her own house. No sooner than she locked the car's doors, Paul's van rumbled up down the street, pulled directly behind my mom, and tapped her rear bumper, though not enough to cause any damage to either car. He got out and started shrieking at her, waving his arms and threatening to unleash his dogs at us, and then to call the cops because he backed into him, though she wasn't even in the car. All kinds of crap. My other neighbor heard the commotion and came out of the house. His name was Brian, a muscular old black guy who kept to himself but didn't take shit from anyone. He told Paul to leave my mom alone, that he saw everything and should be picked up on a woman half his size. Paul was not only a jackass, he was also a racist. He threw a few slurs around, but was too chicken to do anything, since Brian was larger than he. Paul went into his house, and Brian stayed with us until my dad came home. My dad was livid. He had told my mom to take my sister and me in the car for a drive. I didn't know this at the time, but this was not the first time Paul had threatened my mother. I never found out what he said, but considering Paul, it was probably something disgusting and violent. Neither did I get the whole story after we left the house, but here's what I can piece together. Once we were gone, my dad confronted him outside our back shed and grabbed him by the shirt collar. He told Paul that if he wanted to start shit with his wife, he would have to go through him first. To this day, my dad will not reveal the verbal exchange between him and Paul, but I know that threatening his daughters or wife will bring out the worst in him. At this point, the cops showed up. I don't know if a neighbor, Paul, or my dad had called them, but they sent both of them to their respective houses and talked separately to each other. My dad told them the things that Paul had said, and Paul showed them his ripped shirt from where my dad grabbed him. The cops technically considered my dad the integrator, even though Paul threatened my mom, but he didn't press charges, so my dad ended up paying a minor fine. A few weeks later after that, everything just stopped. We all came home one day, and his van and dog were gone. So was the banging at night. We talked to the landlord, who said Paul had stopped paying his rental bills several months back, but skipped town before he could confront him. His phone service has also been cut due to missing payments, and this was before people regularly had cell phones and email addresses. So there was no way to figure out where he went. He also left the house a total mess, trash and dog feces all over the place. Don't ask about the dog turds, even though his dog was always outside. I'm hoping they were from the dog. Additionally, one of the walls that he shared with our house, we lived in a row home, had the drywall completely torn away in a person-sized hunk, exposing the house to the electrical wire, plumbing, and the brick of our house. Eventually, we got new neighbors, but that wasn't the last we heard of Paul. One day we got a knock on the door, and it was from our lawyer. He had a court summons from Paul and asked if we were where he was. We told the lawyer that Paul didn't live here anymore, but because this was his legal address, there was nowhere else to send it, and they had to leave it with someone. This went on for several years, and my mom, dad, and the neighbors who moved in all told different lawyers that Paul didn't live there anymore. We had no idea where he was, and frankly, we didn't want to know. Eventually, my sister and I had an idea to run his name on an internet search to see what all the fuss was. We found out he was wanted for skipping his rent, unpaid parking tickets, animal abuse, and the most disturbing of all, the molestation of his 6-month-old granddaughter. Hey guys, Sauce Man here. I just wanted to thank you, or let you know that this is the first video of this channel. And all of these were found on Brosgrim, and one of them, being number 2, I think was found on a Reddit post. I don't remember, as I found that story forever ago, and I posted it to my phone because it's probably my favorite story ever from, Reddit and whatever. And tell me if you guys like these, because I've been working on this video for a bit, and it really shouldn't have been as long as it was, but things happen. Sorry I didn't do so well on this. It's my first go. I actually had a lot of outtakes because I missaid a word or missed where I was reading, and it's kind of stressful. So, submit some stories to me if you have any, and I'll be sure to narrate them, because I would like to do more of this in the future, and I'll make sure to do a lot more in the future as well. So with that being said, my name is Awesome, and, well, stay awesome.